Yeah.
and thought it was something worth advancing in this manner. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I never had a whole lot of faith in people, but the last few years have taken it down further than I thought it could ever go, because people don't want to know the truth. They just want to chant slogans.
Well, take me back, Mariana, to before when you joined the National Butterfly Center in 2012. You were a business development specialist. You were going to take it over to become the executive director. What was the border like in Mission, Texas at that time? What was the awareness of what was going on?
Well, the border honestly has not really changed very much from 2012 to today, at least not in the National Butterfly Center. It's peaceful. We host over 6,000 school children a year. We do an annual sleepover under the stars on the banks of the Rio Grande River with Girl Scouts and their troop leaders. We grow plants in our nursery. We sell to the public and to commercial landscapers. We host the Texas Butterfly Festival. All of these things go on with no invasion, no lawless aggression, no terror from drug lords and rapists and all of the things that come out of the president's mouth. That is alien to us. Like, I don't know. I mean, it seems like something maybe from Japanese anime or some fantastic film, not our reality at all.
And that's the thing that I'm curious about, because how did you get word that things were changing? How did that communicated to you?
It was not communicated to me. What happened is July 20th, 2017, I believe it was a Thursday, I drove over the levee on our property, which runs all the way to the river. And when I crossed the levee, there were 5 strangers on our property.
On your property?
On our private property that belongs to the nonprofit North American Butterfly Association. 3 of the men had chainsaws and all their safety gear. They were cutting down our trees, and 2 men were on heavy equipment. One was driving a brush hog, and one was driving a brush boom. So it's like the brush hog, but it has this reticulated arm.
Yeah.
And they were just desiccating the habitat, widening the road. And of course,
on your property?
On our property. And I got out of the car and I'm waving and I'm screaming and, hey, time out, like what's going on here? And one of the guys stopped, one of the chainsaw guys stopped, and he came over and he was like, what's up? And I said, what are you doing here? And he goes, well, the government sent us. Like
those words, those are
turn your blood to ice. And I'm like, what government sent you, And he said, well, the government sent us to clear this land all the way to the river ahead of the border wall. And the river to the levee on our property is 1.2 miles. And the company is called TIKIGAQ, TIKIGAQ, an Alaska National Corporation, clearing private property at the tip of South Texas. And this was 9 months before any congressional vote or appropriation authorizing or funding border wall. And I said, this is my property. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, this is private property. You need to get off now. And he goes, well, I think I need to call my supervisor. And I said, yeah, I think you should do that right now. And he did call his supervisor. And when the supervisor got there, he was on the phone and he was waving some papers around. And I went to speak to him and he was like, get back over there. And the papers, he refused to show me, but they had photos of our property, of our entrance, of our gate, of everything. So they were in the right place in terms of where the government sent them, but they had absolutely no authority to be there. And that was the day that we noticed the surveyor's stakes and the giant, so they're like these plastic strips and nails about that long that they form an X. And apparently that's what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers uses for aerial surveying. So the surveyors and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had also entered our property with no right of entry. So it's wholesale trespass, occupation of our land, destruction of our property with no legal process whatsoever.
And it couldn't have just been happening to you.
No, at that point we drove all around and saw the surveyor stakes and the aerial survey marks on the roads everywhere. And at that time, I had a border community liaison officer. And he was a Border Patrol agent whose job it is to liaise with landowners and the
Right.
public. And I called him and I was like, dude, what's going on? And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, there are these guys here on our, and he goes, let me find out, I'll call you back. He didn't call me back. I called him back later and I was like, have you got any answers? And he was like, no. And at the same time, the board president, Dr. Jeffrey Glassberg, and his wife
At the
were
Butterfly Center.
at the Butterfly Center, but they were at their home in New Jersey. Dr. Jane Scott had gone into hospice about a week earlier. And her husband, the board president, my boss, told me, unless the place burns to the ground, do not contact me. And I sent him photos of the heavy equipment and the destruction on the land and asked if I had permission to go to the media. And he responded, yes, that was it. And she passed away the next day. But I filmed a very impromptu piece. The wind is screaming, I'm screaming at the camera, and we uploaded it to YouTube because Border Patrol just, they didn't come forward with any answers that day. And so we went public. At that point, the news media started responding. The next morning, Border Patrol sent 5 agents to the Butterfly Center to deal with me, not even to meet with me. But they arrived and they said, what you're alleging did not happen. So this is,
Don't
I
believe your eyes.
I
Don't
went-
believe what you have. Didn't happen.
It didn't happen. I went down the rabbit hole July 20th, 2017, and I'm still there. So I said, get in your trucks, boys, and follow me. Because the heavy equipment was still there, the felled trees, everything was still there. And these 5 agents, you could tell they were all like, oh, shit, like
Yep.
whatever was happening was very clearly above their pay grade. I understand that they did not know what was happening. Several of these guys I knew. I dealt with them for the past, 5 years. So they were not lying. They were genuinely surprised, but they still had no answers. And they said someone would get back to me. Someone from the Customs and Border Protection Real Estate Office would be in touch with me. And we set an appointment for August 1st, so it was going to take them that long to, I don't know what, prepare. And on August 1st, I got a text message that the meeting had been canceled. So I still have never gotten any information or any answers. On August 1st, 2017, Chief Manuel Padilla, who at the time was the Border Patrol chief of the McAllen sector, Rio Grande Valley sector, I believe, showed up to see me in plain clothes with his attaché in an unmarked vehicle and a uniformed agent. And he told me this was for the border wall. Our contractors will return with green uniform presence, which I said, you mean armed federal agents on private property to guard for-profit contractors? And he said, well, to fulfill our mission. And that no one could stop them, and that the National Butterfly Center and Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park and the 2 wildlife refuges, the federal properties that form our section, the NABA section of the lower Rio Grande Valley Wildlife Conservation Corridor, would be ground zero for Trump's border wall, because we represented the path of least resistance. that's how I found out what we were in for.
When, how did you keep from losing your mind?
Uh, I don't know. I'm still struggling with that
Exactly.
one.
No, I understand that, but all right. So the path forward to deal with this went how?
Well, you know, my boss is making funeral arrangements for his wife and, you know, in the throes of grief.
Of course.
And so I'm having to deal with other board members at the
Mm-hmm.
time, and they're dumbfounded. I mean, they're just in shock and disbelief,
Yes.
really. I mean, as anyone would be, they're like, what? I'm having to explain this a million times. And one of the board members said, you know, do you have any local members who are lawyers, members of the National Butterfly Center or NABA, who are attorneys? Can you reach out to them and see what, you know, where do we go from here? What do we do? And so I did that. There were a couple of members who were lawyers, and they stepped forward. And even though eminent domain and, you know, some of these other issues are not their area of expertise, they were
Certainly.
able to connect us to people like the Texas Civil Rights Project and the American Civil Liberties Union. And those people have been invaluable in their guidance and assistance. And so we started, you know, just gathering everything that we needed to for the attorneys, and we filed suit. In December of 2017, we filed suit against the federal government, against the Trump administration and the Secretary of Homeland Defense, who at the time was
Yep.
Christian Nielsen. That's changed a couple of times since
Exactly.
then. And then our suit hung out for 14 months. We never had a single day in court. And what my boss now calls the Valentine's Day Massacre, February 14th, 2019, Judge Richard Leon in Washington, D.C., summarily dismissed our suit. The day before, Trump signed the 2019 Department of Homeland Security spending bill, which exempted us from construction of border wall, but only with monies appropriated by Congress. And on that same day, Trump declared the fake state of emergency
Yeah.
and announced his intention to take billions of dollars from the Department
Yep.
of Defense and other programs. That day, he was informed that the Treasury Department would be handing over $601 million in Treasury forfeiture funds that he would use to build the border wall. And so there's the rub. And we've obtained court documents that, you know, where members of the administration and of the Department of Homeland Security declare that those monies will be used exclusively in the Rio Grande Valley to build border barrier, border wall. And it was in May that Trump and his son-in-law Kushner met with senators about immigration and border wall and everything. And the report was that the senators were underwhelmed with Kushner's performance and all of the actions that the administration was taking to deal with the crisis on the southern border. And Kushner is quoted as saying, "But we solved the butterfly thing, didn't we?" You can Google that. So the whole thing was a con. Surprise, surprise.
Well, let's talk about this, because I mean, we know this is a time of such change. Both you and I, we are both Mexicans, and hilariously, as we both get, you don't look Mexican. Mexican is not a nationality. It's not a race. It is a nationality.
Right.
This is our nation, and we have this challenge that we're seeing. This idea of putting a border is something that it's not even going to work.
It's not, especially in the Rio Grande Valley and other areas of South Texas, and ultimately Big Bend and other places. The river is the border.
Yes.
They're not patrolling the river. They're not building a barrier at the border. They're building it miles inland. They will be carving millions of acres off of Texas. And many people ask, why are they forfeiting the river? But the real scheme is that the government is not, the U.S. government is not forfeiting the river. They are building the wall to protect the river from the people and to seize that natural resource from the people, to take control of it. And all of the pumps on the river, the pumps that bring in water to our treatment facilities and farms that keep more than 6 million people alive in South Texas,
Yes.
those pumps will be behind the border wall, guarded by a paramilitary police force. So if they choose to turn off the water, as they've done in places like Venezuela,
Sure.
we literally die of thirst,
Yeah.
even though we have the Rio Bravo
Yeah.
in our backyard.
How far along is this? Is there a reversibility to this, or a stoppage, as much of the carnage has already been spent? And where are we along this process? Bring us up to date here in November 2019.
In February of 2019, actually on Super Bowl Sunday. So they take advantage of the times when people
Sure.
will be distracted.
Yep.
The equipment began rolling in, and in February they began desiccating the National Wildlife Refuge track adjacent to Benson State Park. So they bring in this piece of equipment that looks like an excavator, only instead of the digging arm, it has a grinder on it. And this grinder starts at the top of a tree and goes zzzz, and turns the whole tree and everything in it into sawdust in a matter of seconds. And so that area has been raised, that remnant of native habitat, in an area where less than 5% of our native vegetation remains. And it's all set aside for conservation of plant and animal species.
Absolutely. By that huge liberal Richard Nixon, who set up the EPA, right?
Yeah. And so they've cleared what the government calls the enforcement zone, which is now a dead zone. And they're smoothing it out, and they've marked the area for excavation where they will pour the concrete footing, because what we are getting is 18-foot tall vertical concrete wall with 18-foot tall steel bollard wall on top, and then 22-foot tall all-night blitzkrieg lighting that will focus on the conservation areas. And you know, all you have to do is go to like darkskies.org and other places to understand the impact that light pollution has on plants, mammals, birds, insects. So this is wholesale destruction.
Yes.
Of what my boss has called a fragile but vibrant ecosystem. And we're a subtropical zone. You know, the desert is alive, even though people think it's just sand and cactus. But we don't even look like sand and cactus. I mean, we are the alluvial delta of the Rio Grande River as it floods into the Laguna Madre, as it spills into the Gulf of Mexico. So we have incredibly fertile farmland. We have riverine woodland that's endangered. We have 11 biologically distinct ecosystems in a 4-county region as you go from the rocky terrain and the oyster beds of Starr County into the salt marsh of South Padre Island. And this area all borders the river where the wall is being built.
Is there, you have gone and testified to Congress. You have worked, where is this in the resistance in stopping this madness?
You know, people can only sustain their distress and fury for so long.
Absolutely. That's one of the,
And we have Trumpster fire after Trumpster fire daily. I think that what has to happen is that people's outrage needs to be consolidated. They need to understand that the border wall isn't just about national security. In fact, it has absolutely nothing to do with national security. It is a scheme concocted by for-profit corporations to steal more of our tax dollars. It is built inland where it requires the largest theft of private property in modern history. It is a hurdle and a harvesting mechanism for the for-profit prisons because ladders, because gates. It will do absolutely nothing to stop anyone from landing on U.S. soil with drugs, with weapons, with people. It will simply allow Border Patrol and Core Civic and the GEO Group to gather more of those people and put them in the for-profit prisons, while the construction project rewards the Sullivan Brothers and Fisher Industries and Southwestern constructors, all of these campaign donors, and the border wall steal. We've pushed the Oversight Committee and the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Committee and other members of Congress, as well as investigative journalists, to prove us wrong, and no one has.
wow.
That the border wall steel, the rebar and the steel bollard, are coming primarily from a company called Evraz. Evraz is owned by 3 Russian oligarchs that are members of the Putin cartel. The primary owner is Roman Abramovich. His wife was the personal guest of Jared Kushner and of Ivanka at the inauguration. Roman is a Russian-Israeli businessman. So this ties into everything related to the U.S. support of Israel, the surveillance technology being used against U.S. citizens, against journalists and lawyers and activists and residents of the borderlands, all comes from Israel. These raid towers and aerostat balloons that we now have next door to us, that we operate in the shadow of for audio and video surveillance. It is wholesale theft of all of the dollars that should be used to support our education systems, our failing internal infrastructure like our highways and our dams.
And our water systems.
Our water systems, healthcare, homelessness, which, is a crisis in Austin.
Yes.
He's stealing money from veterans' pensions and military construction projects for this, from museums and libraries and from Meals on Wheels. And we're letting it happen because people believe that somehow the border wall is going to enhance their quality of life.
Yes.
When actually it's contributing to the destruction of it.
When we get a mythology like that, and that gets implanted, my sense is that this is as long as I can find, for whatever it is, the disquietude that I'm feeling within me, if I can find someone to blame so I don't have to look inside, then that's the victimization, and that's where I think that his brilliance is. Trump's brilliance is that he ties right into that victimization and said, if we deal with those people, if we just have them, you're going to be fine. And yet, we all know that this is the time of the greatest change and transformation in human history. We are moving into an entirely new way. This is not. It's going to require a great deal and all hands on deck in order for us to be able to do this.
It is, and we've got to overhaul immigration in this country for a million reasons.
Yes.
We need a safe, fast, affordable mechanism. The last comprehensive immigration reform plan that was proposed and went to Obama, went to Congress, was actually crafted by the American Medical Association and the American Bar Association, and it was totally predatory. It required that immigrants have a lawyer of record and a doctor of record for 10 years and see them and pay them for those visits every 6 months in order to apply for citizenship. So, the people who are already doing the jobs, the dirty jobs,
Yes.
scrubbing our toilets, slaughtering our pigs,
Yep.
washing our dishes,
Getting up on our roofs in 100 and some odd degree temperature to re-roof.
exactly, digging our sewer trenches, the people doing all of these jobs for no benefits, often not even getting paid, being abused,
Yep.
working, excessively long days for less than minimum wage and all of this, were offered a salvo that further harmed and victimized them. But no one profits from real solutions. And immigration is not a problem.
Exactly. What a perfect segue to the next. That's just perfect. I am